Female diner owner saves 20 truckers in a snowstorm next day. A long line of trucks shows up. The rhythmic guttural roar tore Fran Miller from the uneasy sleep she'd managed in the diner's tiny back office, her cheek still creased from the vinyl couch cushion. It wasn't one engine, but many a symphony of diesel power that vibrated through the thin walls of Fran's pit stop, rattling the few remaining coffee mugs on the shelf. The storm had broken hours ago, the relentless howl of the Wyoming wind finally surrendering to a bruised, icy dawn. But this new sound, this growing chorus of heavy machinery, was alien and unsettling. Rubbing the grit from her eyes, Fran stumbled to the grease-stained front window, her worn slippers scuffing on the cold linoleum. She pushed aside the faded gingham curtain, her breath catching in her throat. The narrow access road leading from I-80, usually a desolate ribbon of cracked asphalt, was choked. As far as she could see, stretching back towards the invisible highway, was a line of 18-wheelers, dozens of them. Their headlights, though dimmed in the nascent daylight, pierced the lingering gloom, reflecting off the fresh, deep snow like 1,000 searching eyes. More were arriving, their air brakes hissing in the frigid air, the ground trembling beneath their immense weight. They weren't just passing, they were turning in one by one, their massive forms inching towards her small, isolated diner. What in God's name was happening? Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of disbelief and a sudden sharp spike of fear. This wasn't normal. This wasn't anything she'd ever seen. Fran Miller, at 52, felt as weathered and worn as the Wyoming landscape that surrounded Fran's pit stop. Her hands, gnarled from years of hot grills and harsh cleaning chemicals, were rarely still. Her silver-streaked brown hair was usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her smile, though less frequent these days, still held a genuine warmth that could thaw the iciest traveler. The pit stop, a relic of a bygone era of highway travel, was her life, her burden, and her last tangible link to her late husband, Dave. Dave had poured his heart and soul into this place, envisioning it as more than just a diner, but a true pit stop for weary truckers. A place of hot coffee, hearty food, and a moment's respite from the lonely road. For years, it had been just that. The roar of engines was a constant lullaby, the CB chatter a familiar language. But Dave had been gone 5 years now, taken by a heart attack that came as suddenly and devastatingly as a Wyoming blizzard. Since then, Fran had fought a losing battle. The new interstate bypass, completed 2 years after Dave's death, had siphoned off much of the through traffic. Sleek, modern corporate truck stops with their fast food chains, expansive convenience stores, and acres of paved parking had sprung up at the major interchanges, leaving independent diners like Fran's gasping for air. The vibrant red paint on the pit stop sign had faded to a dull, sun-baked pink. The vinyl on the booth seats was cracked and mended with duct tape. The ancient coffee machine wheezed and sputtered, much like Fran's own dwindling hope. She lived alone in the small apartment attached to the back of the diner, her only daughter Jessica married and living in Denver with Fran's 2 young grandchildren. Jessica called weekly, her voice always edged with concern, gently suggesting Fran sell the place, move closer, enjoy a well-deserved rest. Fran knew she was right. The bank account was dangerously low. The foreclosure notices, initially polite suggestions, were becoming more insistent. The loneliness, especially during the long, quiet afternoons when not a single customer darkened her door, was a heavy cloak. Her days were a monotonous cycle of brewing coffee that often went unsold, prepping food that ended up as her own dinner, and staring out at the empty highway lost in memories of better times. Of Dave's booming laugh of the diner, packed with boisterous truckers, their stories filling the air. Her regulars were few now: old Pete, a retired trucker, who'd known Dave and still came in for coffee and company, a couple of local ranchers who appreciated her no-nonsense cooking, and the occasional lost tourist. The Wyoming winters were the worst. The isolation intensified, the heating bills soared, and the threat of being snowed in was constant. Each approaching winter felt like a tightening vice. Fran had tried everything: local specials, flyers at the tiny post office in Laramie, even a disastrous attempt at a Facebook page. Nothing stemmed the slow bleed. The thought of giving up, of finally admitting defeat and selling Dave's dream for pennies on the dollar, was a bitter pill she was increasingly resigned to swallowing. This winter, she'd told herself, would be the last. One more season, and then she'd hang up her apron for good. The fight was just too hard, too lonely. The world had moved on, and Fran's pit stop, it seemed, was being left behind, a forgotten relic on a forgotten stretch of road. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving had started with an ominous gray sky and a biting wind that promised the first serious snowstorm of the season. Fran had listened to the weather forecast on her crackling kitchen radio. The announcer's dire warnings about blizzard conditions and potential highway closures doing little to lift her spirits. Business had been non-existent all morning. By 3 p.m., as the first fat, heavy snowflakes began to spiral down, she was seriously considering closing early. What was the point? Old Pete had been her only customer, nursing a coffee and sharing anxieties about the storm. "This one's gonna be a big one, Fran," he'd said, his weathered face grim. "They're already talking about shutting down I-80 by nightfall. You got enough wood for that stove?" Fran had nodded her gaze, sweeping over the empty booths. "Enough for me, Pete. Not much else to worry about." Just as Pete was bundling up to leave, the lights flickered, buzzed, and then died, plunging the diner into a dim gray twilight. "Damn it!" Fran muttered, fumbling for the emergency flashlight she kept under the counter. The ancient generator out back, Dave's pride and joy, had been unreliable for years. She hadn't had the money for a proper repair, let alone a new one. She'd walked Pete to the door, the wind already whipping the snow into a frenzy. "You be careful going home," she'd told him. "You too, Fran. Don't you be a hero." Alone in the growing darkness, with the wind howling like a banshee outside, Fran felt a profound wave of desolation wash over her. This was it, the final straw. No power, a blizzard raging, and an empty diner that was bleeding her dry. The decision, hovering for months, solidified with a painful certainty. She would close. Tomorrow, or as soon as the storm passed, she'd call the bank, call a realtor. It was time to let Dave's dream go. It was too heavy a burden to carry alone anymore. She was about to retreat to her apartment in the back, to huddle under blankets and wait out the storm and her own misery, when she saw them. A pair of headlights, then another and another, struggling through the swirling snow, pulling off the increasingly treacherous highway. Truckers, caught out by the sudden ferocity of the storm and the quick closure of I-80. They were parking haphazardly along the edge of her unplowed lot, their powerful engines idling their running lights, casting eerie glows in the blizzard. Her first instinct was to ignore them. She was closed. She had no power, barely enough food for herself. But then she remembered Dave. He'd never have turned anyone away in a storm. "This place ain't just about selling burgers, Franny," he used to say, his arm around her shoulders. "It's about offering a little warmth, a little shelter from the storm, literal and otherwise." The memory, so vivid, was like a gentle hand pushing her forward. With a sigh that was part resignation, part resolve, Fran grabbed her heaviest coat, pulled on her boots, and found the old kerosene lamp. She lit it, its flickering flame casting dancing shadows, and unlocked the diner's front door. Stepping out onto the small porch, she yelled into the teeth of the gale, her voice nearly snatched away by the wind, "Hey, you drivers, get yourselves in here. Got a wood stove and some hot coffee, what's left of it?" Slowly figures began to emerge from their cabs, bundled against the biting cold, their faces etched with relief. One by one, then in small groups, they trudged through the deepening snow towards the diner's welcoming, if faint light. There were about 20 of them in all, a motley crew of men and women, young and old, their breath misting in the frigid air. Fran got the old pot-bellied stove in the corner roaring with the last of her seasoned firewood. The smell of wood smoke soon mingled with the aroma of brewing coffee. She'd found a forgotten bag of beans and heated water on the stove's flat top. She rummaged through her nearly bare pantry, a few potatoes, some onions, carrots, a couple of cans of tomatoes, and some bouillon cubes. Soup. It wouldn't be much, but it would be hot. "It's not five-star cuisine, folks," she announced, stirring the meager ingredients in her largest pot, "but it'll warm your bellies." For the first time in what felt like years, Fran's pit stop was full not with paying customers, but with grateful souls, seeking refuge. The low murmur of conversation, the clinking of mugs, the flickering lamplight, and the radiating heat from the stove created a pocket of warmth and camaraderie against the raging storm. Fran, ladling out her simple soup, felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Dave would have approved. Her decision to close just hours old began to feel a little less certain. The small diner, usually echoing with emptiness, was now a hive of hushed activity and shared warmth. Fran moved among the stranded truckers, refilling coffee mugs with water heated on the wood stove, offering extra blankets she'd pulled from her own apartment, and listening more than she talked. The 20 souls crammed into Fran's pit stop were a cross-section of America's lifeline grizzled veterans with millions of miles under their belts. Fresh-faced young drivers on their first major solo runs, a husband and wife team, and a quiet woman named Maria, who crocheted intricate doilies as she sipped her soup. One of the younger truckers, a man in his late 20s with a friendly grin and a mop of curly brown hair, introduced himself as Eli Turner. He had a smartphone mounted on a small tripod, and Fran noticed him occasionally speaking quietly to it, a small LED light glowing on its face. "Just updating my followers," he explained with a sheepish smile when he caught her eye. "I do a bit of vlogging. Rigstream Eli helps pass the time on the road." Fran, who barely knew how to send a text message, just nodded, not thinking much of it. The complications were numerous. The firewood was dwindling faster than she'd anticipated. Her pantry, already sparse, was quickly emptying. The single small restroom was under considerable strain. When the ancient pipes groaned and then burst under the strain of the freeze, sending a trickle of icy water across the restroom floor, it was 2 of the older truckers, a burly man named Gus, and Quiet Pete, who had, against Fran's advice, ventured out in the storm to check on her when he saw the trucks and ended up staying who managed to find the shutoff valve and make a temporary fix with duct tape and ingenuity. Fran, despite her exhaustion, felt a strange sense of calm. She was running on adrenaline and something akin to Dave's old spirit. She organized a rota for stoking the fire, rationing the last of the coffee like precious gold. When a young driver named Kenny started shivering uncontrollably, clearly coming down with a bad cold, Fran found some old aspirin in her medicine cabinet and made him drink cup after cup of hot water, tucking an extra blanket around him in a quiet booth. Eli, meanwhile, was providing his Rigstream followers with a captivating real-time drama. He panned his camera around the cozy, lamplit scene, Fran, her face softened by the warm light, gently placing a hand on Kenny's forehead. Gus and Pete sharing a joke by the stove, the diverse group of drivers, strangers, thrown together by a circumstance, sharing stories and the last of Fran's bread. He narrated quietly, his voice filled with admiration. "You guys are seeing this right. This is Fran, owner of this little diner in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming. Powers out, blizzards raging, and she's taken in about 20 of us. Fed us, kept us warm, hasn't asked for a dime. This is pure kindness, folks. The real deal." He showed them the sign Fran had hastily scribbled on a piece of cardboard and propped on the counter. "Tonight, free soup, warm fire, good company. Payment, stay safe." His viewers were mesmerized. The chat scrolled wildly. People asked for Fran's location for ways to help. Eli, initially just sharing his experience, realized something powerful was happening. He mentioned Fran's pit stop was struggling, that she was thinking of closing. The response was immediate. "How can we donate? Let's save Fran's. She's an angel." One viewer, a woman named Margaret from Oregon, typed in a frantic message, "Is there a tall man there?" Older gray beard answers to Wilson, "That's my dad. I've been trying to reach him." Eli scanned the room. "Hang on, Margaret." He walked over to an older trucker who fit the description. "You Wilson?" The man nodded. "Your daughter Margaret's on my stream. She's worried sick. Says to tell you she loves you." Wilson's eyes welled up. Eli turned the phone so Wilson could wave. Margaret's tearful thank yous flooded the chat. Unaware of her burgeoning online fame, Fran was dealing with a new crisis. The last of the firewood was burning low. Just as despair began to set in, Gus remembered seeing a pile of old broken pallets behind the diner during a previous stop. He and 3 other able-bodied truckers bundled against the storm that had momentarily lessened its fury, ventured out with Fran's rusty axe and a couple of flashlights. They returned 20 minutes later, coated in snow, but triumphant, their arms laden with splintered wood, enough to see them through till morning. As the first hint of gray light began to filter through the snow-caked windows, the atmosphere in the diner was one of weary gratitude. Fran, her face pale with fatigue, but her eyes bright, looked around at the sleeping forms at the makeshift community that had blossomed in her struggling diner. She had faced down the storm both outside and within herself. The thought of selling, of giving up, felt distant, almost foreign. For one night, Fran's pit stop had been exactly what Dave had always dreamed it would be. As dawn fully broke, the wind had died to a whisper, leaving behind a world transformed, blanketed in an almost surreal silence and deep, pristine snow. News crackled over a battery-powered radio. One of the truckers had I-80 was still closed, but road crews were hoping to have at least one lane cleared by midday. A collective sigh of relief went through the diner. The truckers began to stir, stretching cramped limbs, their faces reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and profound gratitude. They helped Fran tidy the diner, stacking a mountain of used coffee mugs and soup bowls by the sink, which was still out of commission due to the burst pipe. They insisted on pooling their cash, pressing a thick wad of bills into Fran's hand. "This is for everything, Fran," said Maria, the crocheting trucker. "You're a lifesaver." Fran, deeply touched, tried to refuse. "No, please, I just did what anyone would. You all keep your money. You'll need it on the road." But they were insistent, leaving the cash on the counter when she wouldn't take it. Eli Turner was one of the last to prepare to leave. He approached Fran, his usual cheerful grin replaced by a more serious, earnest expression. "Fran," he said, taking her hand, I don't think you understand what happened here last night. Not just in this diner, but out there." He gestured vaguely towards the window. "You went viral, big time." Fran looked at him, mystified. "Viral, like a sickness?" Eli chuckled. "No, ma'am, like famous. My live stream, well, a lot of people saw what you did. They saw your kindness. They were moved deeply. People are calling you the angel of the highway." Fran blushed, pulling her hand away. "Oh, that's just silly. I didn't do anything special." "You opened your doors and your heart in the middle of a blizzard, Fran. That's pretty special these days," Eli said. "Look, a lot of folks wanted to help. They sent donations through my channel for you, for the diner." He paused, then said, "It's a significant amount, and I think more help is coming. Just be ready, okay? You deserve it." He squeezed her arm gently. "You're a hero, Fran." With waves and final shouts of thanks, the truckers rumbled out of the parking lot one by one, their departure leaving a sudden echoing silence. Fran stood alone in the messy, cold diner. The leftover cash on the counter felt heavy in her pocket. "Angel of the highway," she murmured, a skeptical smile playing on her lips. It sounded like something out of a movie. She surveyed the scene. The dirty dishes, the depleted pantry, the lingering smell of wood smoke, and unwashed bodies. The brief sense of purpose she'd felt during the night was replaced by an overwhelming weariness and the cold, hard reality of her situation. The burst pipe, the broken generator, the dwindling bank account, the foreclosure notices. One night of playing Florence Nightingale didn't change any of that. The diner was still failing. She was still on the verge of losing everything. Perhaps, she thought with a pang of guilt, she could use the trucker's cash and Eli's promised donations to pay off a few urgent debts, make the closure a little less financially devastating. It felt wrong, but what else could she do? The idea of reopening, of trying to keep the pit stop alive, seemed like a fantasy. She walked to the front window, intending to flip the faded closed sign back into view. As she reached for it, she heard it. That same deep, rumbling sound she'd woken to, but this time it was closer, louder, more insistent. She peered out. Her breath hitched. It wasn't her imagination. The access road was again filling with trucks. Not just one or two, but a long, slow-moving convoy of them, their chrome grills flashing in the watery morning sun as it broke through the clouds. These weren't all the same trucks from last night. There were new ones, dozens of them, and not just semi-trailers, but pickups, utility vans, even a couple of local tow trucks. They were forming a line, a massive, improbable parade, all heading directly towards Fran's pit stop. Fran's mind reeled. Eli's words came back to her. More help is coming. Just be ready. What had she done? What was happening? This wasn't just gratitude from the 20 souls she'd sheltered. This was something else, something bigger, something that made her heart pound with a mixture of terror and a wild, unbelievable hope. She was standing on the precipice of something, and she had no idea what it was. Fran stumbled out onto the diner's small snow-covered porch, her worn cardigan pulled tight against the biting Wyoming air, her eyes wide with disbelief. The sheer number of vehicles was staggering. The first truck in line, a gleaming Peterbilt, idled to a halt right in front of her. The driver's door swung open, and out climbed Wilson the trucker, whose daughter Margaret had found him via Eli's live stream. But he wasn't alone. A younger woman slid out from the passenger side, followed by 2 small children bundled in bright snowsuits. "Fran Miller?" the woman asked, her voice thick with emotion as she hurried forward, the children trailing behind. "I'm Margaret. This is my dad." She gestured to Wilson, who was beaming. "And these are my kids, your dad's grandbabies." Before Fran could respond, Margaret enveloped her in a fierce hug. "Thank you," she sobbed into Fran's shoulder. "Thank you for keeping my dad safe. We drove all night from Oregon as soon as the roads opened a bit." Fran, overwhelmed, could only pat her back awkwardly. I just gave him some soup." "You gave us peace of mind, ma'am," Wilson said, his voice gruff, but his eyes shining. "And it seems a whole lot of other folks appreciate what you did, too." Just then, Eli Turner emerged from the cab of another truck further down the line, a wide grin splitting his face. He jogged up his smartphone, already recording. "Told you more help was coming, Fran," he announced, his voice booming with excitement. "Your story, well, it kind of blew up the internet. Folks from all over the country saw what you did for us last night. They wanted to say thank you, in person. And with this," he gestured dramatically to the line of trucks. As if on cue, drivers began to climb down from their cabs. They weren't just truckers. Fran recognized some local ranchers, the volunteer fire chief, even Mayor Thompson from Laramie. And they were carrying things. Boxes of canned goods, fresh produce, new coffee makers, blankets, tools. One group of men carefully maneuvered a brand-new heavy-duty generator from the back of a flatbed. "This here's from the folks at Big Rig Nation Forum," a driver announced, presenting Fran with a hefty envelope. "And the Trucker Wives of America sent these quilts." Eli stepped forward, holding up his phone for his live stream. "All right, folks, here she is, the angel of the highway herself, and look at this turnout." He then turned to Fran, his eyes sparkling. "While you were busy being a hero, people were donating. Last I checked, just before my signal died coming over the pass, we'd raised, well, Fran, we raised over $37,000 for you and Fran's pit stop." Fran swayed, her hand flying to her mouth. $37,000. It was an impossible sum. She looked at the crowd of smiling faces, at the mountain of supplies growing on her snowy porch, at Margaret Wilson, dabbing her eyes while her children stared at Fran with awe. It was too much. I can't accept all this." She stammered, tears welling in her own eyes. "I just did what anyone would have." "No, Fran, Pete," her old regular stepped forward from the crowd, his voice firm. "Not everyone would. Dave would be so damn proud of you right now. We all are." The local fire chief, a sturdy man named Bill, clapped her on the shoulder. "We're going to get that burst pipe fixed for you, Fran. And check your wiring, install some new smoke detectors while we're at it. Free of charge, of course. Mayor Thompson presented her with a hastily printed certificate of appreciation from the town of Laramie. A local contractor offered to inspect her leaking roof. A teenage girl shyly handed her a drawing of the diner with a halo over it. Fran felt like she was in a dream. The despair that had been her constant companion for so long was being washed away by this astonishing tidal wave of kindness and generosity. The thought of closing the diner, which had seemed so inevitable just hours before now, felt like a betrayal of these people of their faith in her. She looked at the fading sign above the door, Fran's Pit Stop. Dave's dream. Maybe it wasn't dead after all. Maybe this was a second chance, a crazy, improbable lifeline thrown to her from the heart of a storm. The immediate internal conflict was immense. She was a private, humble woman unused to such attention. Part of her wanted to run and hide, but another stronger part, a part that sounded a lot like Dave, knew this was a gift, a responsibility. She couldn't just take the money and the supplies and walk away. These people, these strangers and friends, had rallied for her little diner. A new plan, vague and terrifying, but also exhilarating, began to form in her mind, not just to survive, but to rebuild, to make Fran's Pit Stop worthy of this incredible outpouring of support. To create the place Dave had always envisioned, a true beacon of warmth and community on the long, lonely highway. She took a deep breath, wiping a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. Looking out at the sea of expectant faces, she managed a watery smile. "Well then," she said, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength, I guess we've got some work to do. Anyone know how to fix a busted pipe?" A cheer went up from the crowd. The rebirth of Fran's Pit Stop had begun. Part 6. Rising Action, Reacting and Regrouping. 919 words. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of organized chaos and heartwarming collaboration at Fran's Pit Stop. True to their word, the truckers, local volunteers, and even some of Eli's rig stream followers who'd driven in from neighboring states descended on the diner like a friendly army. The burst pipe was mended by a retired plumber from Cheyenne who'd seen the story on the news. The faulty generator was replaced with a new one. The local fire department rewired much of the aging electrical system and installed new safety equipment. A team of local ranchers handy with tools patched the leaking roof and gave the exterior a fresh coat of vibrant red paint, painstakingly restoring the faded lettering on the iconic sign. Inside, the diner was transformed. Volunteers scrubbed decades of grease from the kitchen, repaired the rickety booths, and reupholstered the cracked vinyl seats in a cheerful cherry red. The donations of food and supplies had filled Fran's once bare pantry and storeroom to overflowing. A local artist painted a beautiful mural on one interior wall depicting a snowy highway scene with a welcoming diner in the distance, a subtle halo glowing above its roof. Fran, initially overwhelmed and hesitant to direct anyone, soon found her footing. Guided by a quiet common sense and her deep understanding of what made a diner welcoming, she coordinated the efforts her earlier weariness replaced by a vibrant energy. She insisted that Dave's favorite old pot-bellied stove remain the centerpiece, a symbol of the diner's enduring warmth. Pete was her unofficial foreman, his knowledge of the diner's quirks proving invaluable. Eli Turner became her de facto communications manager, posting regular updates and photos of the renovation progress to his eager online audience. which only fueled further small donations and offers of help. A web designer from Colorado, a fan of Eli's stream, even built and donated a professional website, https www.google.com. Jockey search. Franspitstop.com, complete with Fran's story photos and a section for Fran's famous storm soup recipe. The media attention was both a blessing and a challenge. Local news crews were followed by regional stations, and soon a producer from a national morning show called wanting to feature Fran as their American hero segment. Fran, a naturally private person, found the interviews nerve-wracking. She'd stumble over her words, constantly deflecting praise, saying she'd only done what anyone with a heart would do. But her sincerity and humility shone through, captivating viewers and further cementing her angel of the highway image. With all the improvements and the unexpected windfall, Fran faced new decisions. She could no longer run the place single-handedly. She hired 2 local women who had recently lost their jobs. Sarah, a single mother with a knack for baking, and young Maria, a different Maria, from the trucker, a high school student saving for college. They brought new life and ideas to the pit stop. Sarah started baking fresh pies and cinnamon rolls daily, their aroma mingling with the ever-present scent of coffee. The biggest challenge for Fran was internal. The sheer scale of the generosity was humbling, but it also brought a weight of expectation. Could she live up to this? Could she make the revived pit stop a sustainable success? Not just a flash in the pan fueled by a viral moment. There were nights she lay awake, the $37,000 which she deposited into a new business account, meticulously tracking every penny, feeling like a heavy burden rather than a gift. She worried about disappointing everyone who had poured their faith and resources into her small diner. One evening, Pete found her sitting alone in the nearly renovated dining room, staring at the fresh paint, a worried frown on her face. "Something wrong, Fran?" he asked gently. "Oh, Pete," she sighed, "it's all so much. What if I mess it up? What if people stop coming once the novelty wears off? Dave knew how to run this place. I'm just me." Pete sat down beside her. "Dave was a good man, Fran, and he built a good place. But you're the one who kept its heart beating, even when things were tougher than tough. You're the one who opened that door in the storm. This isn't just Dave's diner anymore, Fran. It's yours, too. And folks ain't coming just for the coffee. They're coming for you, for that feeling you give 'em. Don't you ever doubt that." His words, simple and true, bolstered her spirits. She wasn't alone in this. She had a community, both local and national, standing behind her. The final test would be the grand reopening scheduled for the Saturday before Christmas. Contractors were finishing the last touches, food deliveries were arriving, and a buzz of anticipation was building, not just in Laramie, but across the trucker forums and social media pages that had embraced Fran's story. Fran took a deep breath. She was ready. The morning of the grand reopening dawned crisp and brilliantly sunny, the fresh snow on the surrounding plains sparkling under a vast blue Wyoming sky. Long before the advertised 10 a.m. opening, the parking lot of Fran's pit stop was already beginning to fill. A festive banner. Fran's pit stop, reborn and rewarmed, welcome home. Friends fluttered above the newly painted entrance. Eli Turner was already live-streaming his camera, capturing the growing crowd, the gleaming red paint of the diner, and the palpable excitement in the air. Fran, wearing a new apron embroidered with Fran, Angel of the Highway, a gift from the Trucker Wives of America, stood nervously by the door, flanked by Pete, Sarah, and young Maria. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She saw familiar faces, many of the truckers she'd sheltered during the storm, local ranchers, Mayor Thompson, Margaret Wilson, and her family who'd driven back from Oregon. But there were also dozens, hundreds of new faces, people who had only known her story through a screen, but had felt compelled to come to be part of this moment. At precisely 10 a.m., Mayor Thompson, with a flourish, handed Fran a comically oversized pair of scissors. Fran Miller, he announced, his voice amplified by a small speaker system Eli had set up on behalf of a grateful town, a thankful state, and I dare say a touched nation. It is my distinct honor to ask you to officially reopen Fran's pit stop. A roar of applause went up. Fran, her hands trembling slightly, snipped the bright red ribbon stretched across the doorway. As the doors swung open, she stepped back, a wave of emotion washing over her. This wasn't just a diner reopening. It felt like the culmination of 1,000 acts of kindness, a testament to the power of community. She had planned a short speech, but as she looked out at the sea of smiling, expectant faces, the carefully rehearsed words vanished. Instead, she spoke from the heart, her voice thick but clear. I don't have fancy words. She began clutching the certificate the mayor had given her. A month ago, I was ready to lock these doors for good. This place, it was Dave's dream, and I thought it had died with him. But then the storm came, and you all came. Her gaze swept across the truckers, and then all of you came. She gestured to the wider crowd. You showed me that kindness isn't just a word, it's action. It's showing up. You didn't just save my diner, you saved a part of me. Tears streamed freely down her face now. Dave always said this place was about offering warmth. Thanks to all of you, Fran's pit stop is warmer than it's ever been. This isn't just my diner, it's our diner, so come on in. The coffee's hot, Sarah's pies are fresh out of the oven, and the storm soup, well, it's on the house today. The crowd surged forward, not in a rush, but with a sense of joyous pilgrimage. The bell above the door jingled merrily, a sound Fran hadn't realized how much she'd missed. The aroma of coffee bacon and baking pies filled the air. Laughter and conversation bounced off the newly painted walls. Fran, Pete, Sarah, and Maria were instantly swamped, but it was a happy, exhilarating chaos. Fran found herself laughing more than she had in years, ladling out her famous soup, her earlier anxieties replaced by a profound sense of joy and belonging. The heart of Fran's pit stop was beating strong again. Fran's pit stop didn't just survive, it thrived. The grand reopening was the start of a new chapter, one filled with bustling energy and a steady stream of customers. Truckers, new and old, made it a regular stop their rigs, filling the expanded parking lot. Locals rediscovered it as their community hub. Tourists, drawn by the heartwarming story that had indeed gone national, detoured off I-80 to experience the angel of the highway's hospitality and taste her now legendary storm soup. Fran, with Sarah and Maria by her side, ran the diner with a renewed sense of purpose. She kept the prices reasonable and introduced a pay-it-forward soup board where customers could buy a bowl for someone in need, ensuring Dave's philosophy of warmth and generosity continued. The website Eli's fan had created took off selling Fran's famous soup kits and T-shirts, with a portion of the proceeds going into a Dave Miller Community Fund that Fran established to help local families facing hardship or stranded travelers. Eli Turner remained a loyal friend and advocate, occasionally broadcasting his rig stream from a booth at Fran's sharing updates and keeping the spirit of the story alive for his thousands of followers. Margaret Wilson and her family became regular summer visitors. Fran never lost her humility. She was still most comfortable in her apron chatting with customers or ensuring the coffee was fresh. But she also found a new confidence. She started mentoring other small diner owners who were struggling, sharing her story and her belief in the power of community. Fran's Pit Stop became more than just a diner. It became a symbol of resilience, kindness, and the extraordinary things that can happen when people open their hearts. One snowy evening, a year after the blizzard that had changed everything, Fran stood by the window of her warm, brightly lit diner. It was full of laughter, the clatter of cutlery, and the aroma of Sarah's apple pie. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, it was a sanctuary. A young trucker, clearly new to the route, hesitantly pushed open the door, a dusting of snow on his shoulders. "Excuse me, ma'am," he asked, Is this the Fran's Pit Stop?" Fran smiled the same warm, genuine smile that had welcomed 20 stranded souls out of a storm. "It sure is hon," she said, gesturing him in. "Welcome. Come on in out of the cold. We've got hot soup, fresh coffee, and there's always room for one more." The bell above the door jingled a cheerful, hopeful sound against the wild Wyoming night.